everyone. This is Heidi Muyieso-Kunzman with the Community and Rural Development Institute at Cornell, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on green economy investments. What do local policymakers need to know? Just a quick check-in. I assume everybody can hear us okay. I've gotten a couple responses that said yes, so if there are any glitches, let us know, but we're assuming that you're hearing us just fine, and we'll go ahead. So this is the 7th webinar in our 2009 Sustainable Communities in an Ever-Changing Context webinar series. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Sustainable Communities series, I want to just mention that it was developed with the recognition that New York communities, like communities everywhere today, face great challenges, but at the same time, great opportunities. Given this context, the series is designed to address topics of interest to New York communities and the extension educators and other community developers working in them, as well as legislators and other local leaders. We've chosen these topics with the goal of providing information that facilitates informed decision-making at the community level. That is, information that helps communities identify, pursue, and achieve their development goals. With each webinar, we try to bring together a campus-based research or extension professional, a community-based practitioner, and an agency representative to provide you with an overview of the subject matter and resources for further information. This webinar is a bit unique in that our presenters are Cornell graduate students from the Department of City and Regional Planning and the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs, who have been working throughout the semester to explore some of the issues policymakers may be confronted with and should take into consideration as they contemplate green economy investments, including those relating to solar power, wind energy, biofuels, local foods, and then job opportunities in the green arena. Their research has been informed by both agency and community-based perspectives. Because webinars are in some ways relatively anonymous, I also want to give you a little bit of information about those joining you for this particular webinar topic. On today's call, we've got approximately 60 people, a little more maybe at this point, representing multiple perspectives, including extension educators, planners and economic developers, workforce investment board program staff, staff from sustainability organizations, professors and students from several higher education institutions, and representatives of sustainable energy technology and construction firms, among others, and we're glad to have everybody on board. I want to thank Professor Susan Christofferson with the Department of City and Regional Planning and the students she's been working with, who she will introduce momentarily, for working with CARDI to share what they've learned. Before handing the mic over to Susan, I want to remind you that the webinar will last approximately 1.5 hours, including ample time for question and answers. We encourage you to use the chat box on the webinar screen to post your questions or comments, and we will pause at the end of each presentation to take a couple of questions, and then have also built in time at the end of the session to take a few additional questions. If we don't get to all of your questions today, because there are a lot of you on, we'll do our best to email you. The students have agreed to email you responses to your questions later on, so please send away. And with that, I'll turn over the mic to Susan.
Hello, my name is Susan Christofferson, and along with Heidi, I'll be hosting this webinar. I want to tell you a little bit about how this webinar came about. We all know that energy efficiency and renewable energy are hot topics. Most of what we hear about the green economy, however, comes from news stories about policy decisions in Albany or in Washington. When it comes to how a green economy can take shape in our backyards, in our cities and counties, we're less certain about the issues we face or the steps we should take. This fall, a group of 10 master's students at Cornell and I decided to tackle that problem by learning all that we could about the green economy at ground level. Of course, this is a very big topic and we couldn't cover everything. The topics you'll hear about today reflect the particular interests of the students as presenters, but they cover some of the critical issues facing local policymakers in New York. To find out about what local policymakers need to know about the green economy, the presenters in this project really dug into their topics. They learned about model programs and about new technologies and about the controversies facing local policymakers. They did site visits and interviewed experts as well as local officials. The results of their work will appear in a set of policy briefs that you'll be getting an email about in the next week. We decided that one way to share what we've learned is to try out the webinar technology. This is the first experience with this way of communicating, and we're looking forward to getting your reactions and questions. So to begin with, in the first presentation on local management of industrial wind siting, I'm going to turn to Kate McCarthy and Eric Vandermaas, who are going to start us off.
Thank you, Susan and Heidi. Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Vandermaas, and the topic that Kate McCarthy and I are about to discuss is the local management of industrial wind energy siting. Those of you who are familiar with upstate New York know it's home to some fairly windy ridges and some long fetches of land. This has caught the interest of wind developers, and the state and federal subsidies have helped to spur development of this wind energy. For a lot of people, wind energy is iconic with the green economy. Although some towns may be excited by this, and I have to tell you that it's also stressed the very fabric in some communities. So this leads us to two main questions. First, do wind farms actually contribute to economic development? And second, for local officials faced with these decisions, what kinds of actions are effective to control it? In order to answer these questions, we're going to describe industrial scale wind development, including its use as economic development, and we're going to suggest 4 actions for managing it. I should mention that we're going to use the term town a lot, and what we mean is that it's a local jurisdiction or any village or township. So, what is industrial wind energy? Wind development can take many forms, but the one that we're speaking about today is industrial wind farm development, and this is sometimes referred to as utility scale. The most visible components, of course, are the wind turbines themselves. Some of them top out over 400 feet high with blades that spin through an arc of about an acre of space. So try and picture a singular post about 100 feet higher than the Statue of Liberty with a 747 airliner spinning around at the top of it, and you've got the feel. These projects can range from a few wind turbines to hundreds, and they can also easily occupy large amounts of land quickly, sometimes more along the lines of an acre or more per turbine. Industrial wind farms usually sit on private land, and they're initially governed by 20 to 30-year leases. The use of private land is a major difference here, because most of us are familiar with industrial uses having their own areas or zones. Another important characteristic of industrial wind development is that it feeds its energy directly to the electrical grid. The host communities do not directly receive the generated power. Of course, wind farms do add their renewable energy to the grid, so in theory, everyone who's connected to the grid does benefit to some degree. I should also mention that there are many controversies that come along with industrial wind development. Among some of the more notable ones are bird and bat kills, noise, some sun flicker, and ice throw. While these are important issues, the decisions are individual to each community, so we're not actually going to debate them here. So where's the green? The economic green, that is. The question on everyone's mind is, how much money can a town make from industrial wind farm development? It's not a straightforward answer, however. It's a little complicated. First, you need to know that a wind farm don't usually pay regular property taxes. It's because wind farms add heavily to the land value, and they come with very high upfront development costs. So paying property taxes is thought to be prohibitive to developers making money on these projects. The simplest way that money is made is through lease agreements between private landowners and the wind developer. Then there's the question of how a town makes money, and you need to brace yourself here because here comes some acronyms. But there's 2 ways. The first is the payment in lieu of taxes, or the pilot agreement. This is negotiated usually by the County Industrial Development Agency, or the IDA, and they're backloaded, meaning that they start small in their payments and then they grow over time. As the developer makes payments, the money is distributed through the community's tax structure. This means that the money from the developer is divvied up amongst the services, like your school or your special service districts, and your government, like a county or town, in the same way as property taxes are. Next comes the host community agreement, which is a totally different animal. It's negotiated directly by the town, and it's front-loaded, meaning that the payments start big at the beginning, and they get smaller toward the end of the project cycle. The purpose of the HCA is to directly compensate the town for their work in review and negotiating and permitting without involving the other taxing entities like the pilot does. The other economic issue that's commonly questioned are the number of jobs that a wind farm creates. And they create jobs in two simple ways. Firstly, during the construction phase, and then also through the operations phase. The construction phase employs the bulk of the people involved, but it's usually for a time frame of about less than a year, depending on the size of the project, of course. Whereas the day-to-day operation requires roughly one permanent position for every 10 to 20 turbines. So it's also helpful to know the actors. And it's also helpful to think of the actors involved as two distinct types of sound. The first pair are more quiet, and this includes the developers and the private landowners. What I mean is that they negotiate and they meet quietly until they're able to reach an agreement on a land lease. It's quiet because wind development is actually very competitive business. The developer then emerges and seeks a permit, and the next two actors take the stage. That's the local officials and the community. This process is louder, it's a little more open, and the local officials, they try their best to balance the rights of private landowners with the community's sentiment, while the community shares its voice. So now I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleague Kate McCarthy, who's going to speak a little more about the management portion of industrial wind development. Kate?
Great, thank you very much, Eric. I'm Kate McCarthy. Now that we know a little bit about the background of industrial wind and what that involves, I'm going to talk about managing the development process. I'm going to talk about 4 actions a town can undertake to manage the development, and then I'll pose a few questions that we recommend towns considering this development option ask themselves. I do want you to know up front that we really meant for these actions and these questions to apply both to towns that are currently being courted by a wind developer and those who maybe haven't given a whole lot of thought to the issue just yet. We hope these will help everybody out. Okay then, so action 1. As Eric mentioned, and as is really no secret to anybody, wind is a fairly contentious issue. So you need to start with a conversation about it that helps people understand the issue and understand what it means for your community in particular. But the first thing you have to know is whether you live in a windy place. How windy is your town? There are wind maps out there that can help you know whether you might be courted by a wind company for the use of your windy ridges. So that's the first place to start. With that information in hand, you can speak with your fellow community members about what it really means for your town. So at this point, use that information to start a conversation. Find out what people's questions are, what people's concerns are. Educate yourselves, educate each other about the issue. We think that it's very important that towns have opportunities to form opinions about this issue without development pressures to the extent possible. That leads us to key action number 2. If you have a windy town, you may want regulations to guide development of wind power. And the reason that we make this suggestion is that as we've been thinking about wind, the conclusion that we've come to is it's green industry, but it is still in fact industry. And just like any other sort of industrial use, you want to have an idea of how that's going to impact your town. You want to know what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like, how far it's going to be from people's houses and property lines. So just as you would do that for any other sort of energy generation facility or factory, you want to do this for wind. That's why we recommend considering a wind ordinance. Now, the other thing we really recognize and respect is that a lot of the areas that are good for wind are also very rural, may or may not have much land use regulation going on. And so this could be a very new idea, but sort of the way that we're looking at it is that if you're going to regulate anything, perhaps this is something you want to consider regulating. Just briefly, I want to mention something called Article 10, because this also has to do with regulation. And I suspect that a lot of you who are out there listening today have heard of Article 10. Currently, localities make the decisions about siting wind. They make the decisions about permitting. But there is a discussion having to do with this Article 10, which is an energy siting law. If this is reenacted, it will allow the state to make decisions about where energy facilities, including wind farms, get sited. So I should be very clear that this is not a law currently. It's being discussed. I believe it's sitting in the Rules Committee of the Senate right now. However, If it does pass, the locality will still have a role, but it would be a different role. The more you've thought about wind in advance using actions 1 and 2, the better off you're going to be. So it's all about being prepared. All right, so I'll just move here through action number 3. This is a very complex development process, and Eric and I have certainly come to appreciate that in the course of the research. And we also really appreciate that a lot of the people out there running and supervising towns in upstate New York are volunteers. This is a big thing to take on. And so one of the pieces of advice we received from a lot of the folks we talked to was that using a neutral, what we call a neutral third party, to help you understand your options for negotiation, for ordinances, for community impact, for environmental impact, it's going to be very important. So this can help guide the conversation. Now, you may look at our slide here and see lawyer, mediator, engineer, and think, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. And that's a very fair reaction. We've all got a lot of budgetary concerns these days. But one of the things we found in our research was some places were able to harness the expertise of people in the community who were able to donate their services, whether they were attorneys, foresters, environmental engineers. You may have quite a lot of resources right there in your backyard. So we'll leave you with that thought, positive thought. All right, then, our last action, know your developer. We were actually a little surprised to learn that different developers take different approaches to managing wind energy. For example, developers have different ideas about how many trees you need to clear around a wind turbine for the wind to function most effectively. You want to know what that's going to look like on the ground if you're considering wind development in your community. So what we recommend there is to talk to people who have worked with these different developers. Go to a wind farm, see what it feels like on the ground to be in an acre of cleared space versus an acre and a half of cleared space. And then you can also do your more standard kind of due diligence work by finding out about the financial backing and information about the developer you're talking with, and develop a reputation. Ask around, talk with other towns. People are generally pretty good about sharing their experiences, and we recommend you take advantage of this fact. Right then, 3 general categories of questions would really encourage you to think about if you're thinking about wind as an economic development strategy. The point of these questions is to help you see or help you understand how and if this can be a good economic development strategy for your town. The first one, we're talking about economic development, so we're talking about money. Are you going to be putting more work into the permitting, negotiation, and regulation than you're getting back? That's a question to ask, a very honest question that you want a good answer to. Second, alternatives to wind development. If you're talking about economic development in general, how does it fit into the rest of your strategy? And then third, negotiation. As they say, everything is negotiable. I think it's really important to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about something like wind development, and you're a small town and they're a great big national firm. It may seem like negotiation is not possible, but when there's something you both want to get out of the situation, out from the outcome, that is how you set yourself up for negotiation. Real quickly then, just to conclude, wind is green economic development, and it can be a great opportunity for towns in upstate, but it's green industry, it's still industry. It needs to be considered in that light. We've discovered that it's a fairly limited number of jobs after the construction phase, but overarching theme here, planning ahead can put towns in the strongest position possible to deal with these issues. So with that, we've learned quite a lot. There's certainly still more to learn, and we will look forward to taking your questions.
And I should point out, as you see these resource slides, that we will be compiling all of the resources into one Word document and sending that out to you following the webinar sometime this week.
This is Susan again. One of the issues that comes up again and again in thinking about the green economy is the question of biofuels. For most people, biofuels mean the ethanol that they put in their gas tanks. But that isn't always the right strategy for every region. And what we're going to hear about next is a biofuel strategy that's right for upstate New York. So Chris Koenig and John Wellmeyer are going to talk about their research on a biofuel strategy right for New York.
Thank you, Susan, Eric, and Kate. It's really great to be here today. My name is Chris Koenig. I'm a master's candidate in the Department of City and Regional Planning. I'm here with my colleague Jonathan Wellmeyer to discuss the combustion of grass pellets as a viable home heating alternative for upstate New York. So Jonathan, you've probably seen a lot of wood-burning stoves, or at least a regular fireplace where you burn small logs and chop timber, right?
Sure, I do. I grew up with both of them. They're great for either supplementing your gas or oil heating or just for a little atmosphere.
Yeah, that's true, but they're not terribly efficient, and trees take a long time to grow. Now, imagine compressing all that wood and energy into a tiny, dense capsule.
Potent, just like orange juice concentrate.
Well, that's the idea. Wood pellets are dense, concentrated fuel, and grass pellets are pretty much the same thing, except that they're even more efficient. And grass grows a lot faster using less resources than trees. So according to researchers, switchgrass and reed canary grass are the two types of grass that do the best on marginal land and perform the best when pelletized and burned. In New York State alone, there are approximately 150 million acres of this type of marginal land that's not really suitable for row crops, but it is for grass.
Well, that sounds pretty nifty, Chris, but what about ethanol? That's what I think when I hear biofuel, and it certainly seems like there's money to be made there.
Yeah, well, ethanol might be workable in some places under some circumstances, but it's not appropriate for upstate New York. Producing ethanol from corn, for example, takes huge swaths of flat land, irrigated water, and sometimes chemical fertilizer.
So pretty much only large agribusinesses in the Midwest have the resources to make ethanol, whereas here in New York we have lots of smaller, individually owned farms.
That's right. But even if New York had the proper infrastructure, the virtues of ethanol are questionable, and grass pellets meet an immediate need. Ethanol is a fuel additive, so when you go to a gas station, you might fill up your car with gasoline that contains a certain percentage, usually 10%, of ethanol. It's used a lot in the transportation sector.
That sounds pretty good, Chris, but here in New York are a lot of rural families that run out of heating oil in the middle of the winter. Not to mention fuel prices keep going up.
That's a great point. New Yorkers need home heating alternatives. Grass pellets are efficient, and they can be produced and consumed locally. It's really a good example of rural empowerment in the state.
So New York farmers could possibly control their own heating fuel and maybe even have some leverage in the regional energy production. Sounds pretty good, Chris, but where do we start?
Well, another problem with ethanol is that it diverts crops from food production to fuel production. So instead of eating corn, the corn goes into our gas tanks. Well, we don't eat grass, and furthermore, we can grow grass in soil that's not even usable for food production.
Nice. So basically we can grow fuel on agricultural land that would otherwise be dormant. And while we don't eat trees either, I imagine grass grows a lot faster.
Indeed it does. It takes about 70 days for a switchgrass feedstock to grow, 3 to 4 years for a wood feedstock for wood pellets, and 70 million years for a fossil fuel feedstock. On top of that, the grasses used for grass pellets are native to New York, so we don't have to import any exotic species. It's all low-impact growth with ecological benefits like creating carbon sinks and seasonal bird nesting habitats.
So it's all gravy? I mean, when farmers grow corn, they get a tax subsidy, and they pay fewer taxes on their land. If you're not growing food, how does that work?
Well, unfortunately, that's a big problem. Currently, state and federal ag policy favors food production on all lands with certain tax incentives. The fact that we don't eat grass makes grass pellets really attractive from an ecological and social perspective, but it's also a weakness from a cost perspective. It's really hard to get an agricultural assessment in New York and the accompanying tax breaks when growing grass for fuel. But there is an opportunity here for small farmers to use cooperatives to combine their production to receive the tax break and reduce the high cost of shipping the raw material to the processing plant.
Okay then, so that covers grass growing, but how do I get my hands on the actual pellets?
Well, once the grass is harvested, it needs to be turned into pellets at a pelletizing plant. These light manufacturing facilities turn harvested grass into pulp, sometimes mixed with wood, and then compressed into pellets.
Are there a lot of these facilities, and are they profitable?
Well, unfortunately, the current lack of pelletizing plants is a pretty big obstacle to stimulating the grass pellet market simply because feedstocks can't get to the plant. Also, startup costs can be high, especially since there are no real tax incentives by the state. The industry could really use an increase in demand to create more revenue and economic impact.
But are there any nearby facilities?
Yeah, there are. New England Wood Pellet Facility in Schuyler, New York is making a go at it. They have about 20 full-time employees and make an annual $10 million in local purchases from local grass growers. Also, Enviro Energy in Wellsbridge is starting up production to serve more southern New York grass farmers. In some places, you'll see mobile pelletizers, in Pennsylvania mostly, to bring the mowed dried grass to bring to the mowed dried grass, so they go to where the grass is instead of the grass going to the pelletizing plant. This may be an option for small, unorganized farms with no shipping capabilities.
Okay, so they not only provide locally produced energy, they also contribute to the local economy. That seems like a far cry from some foreign energy conglomerate hiking up rates and keeping the money out of the local economic loop.
Exactly, but there are some concerns from a planning perspective, and these questions need to be asked by local public officials. For example, when will the net energy produced in pellets offset the amount of energy used to produce the pellets? Or one may ask, how much energy will this plant be using from the grid, and do they have the supportive capabilities in the town? Also, how will the shipping of the product in and out of the facility impact the physical infrastructure and the taxpayers of the town? Who pays for all that? And what will be the increase of bulk delivery in the next 10 years to and from the plant looking to the future?
That's a lot of questions, Chris, but let's say I've got the pellets. How about burning them?
Now, this is where the magic happens. I mentioned before that grass pellets are efficient, but exactly how efficient? Grass pellets have an energy input ratio of 14:1. You can compare that to 3:1 for liquid fuel like ethanol.
That's pretty great, but you're still burning stuff, aren't you? Unlike wind or solar power. Doesn't that produce a lot of emissions?
Yeah, it's true. Grass pellets are not completely clean. They do produce emissions of nitrous oxides and sulfur dioxides, similar to modern oil-burning furnaces. Also, grass burning produces more ash than wood pellets, so you need to get a special stove to burn grass pellets efficiently.
Are these stoves expensive? And do we really want to invest in an energy source that isn't completely clean?
Indeed, the price and rarity of grass-burning stoves is a major obstacle. But because grass pellets are so affordable, the technology in stoves become more affordable in the long run.
Okay, well, if grass pellets are just so cheap, efficient, and locally beneficial, why aren't there more plants? And why are grass pellet stoves so hard to get?
That's a great question. The grass pellet industry is still in its infancy in the U.S., in large part because there is no political lobby for grass pellets and therefore few tax breaks or subsidies. Combine that with the fact that grass-burning stoves are expensive and hard to find, and you can see that grass pellets are not ready for large-scale distribution or consumption at this point.
Well, then who's supporting them then?
Well, you can still get a federal tax break for purchasing a pellet stove. And also, NYSERDA has recently invested $1.6 million in studying wood and grass pellet production and consumption across New York State. Also, researchers at Cornell have assessed growing grass for fuel in New York and have made a lot of progress. The Canadians have also been into this for a while, and their grass pellet industry is more mature in places like southern Ontario and Quebec. And since we have a similar climate and soils, their model is a great place to start. You can check out REAP Canada for more info on that.
All right, Chris, well, what happens next?
Grass pellets need more political and public support. That's the main point. There needs to be public subsidy at the growth and production end as well as the consumption end with stove replacement, retrofit programs. Locally, policymakers should be on the lookout for things like creation of agricultural co-ops in their county, the siting of pelletizing plants, and also exposition events around the region that demos the grass pellets and stoves.
So, excuse me. So grass has a lot of potential to be a really viable source of home heating fuel for upstate. If I had a choice, I'd definitely want to use a grass pellet stove in my house to cut my gas bill and support local farmers at the same time. If you want more information, check out some of those sites listed on your screen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris and John. I think we've got some questions coming in right now for the first two presentations. So we'll turn to Kate McCarthy and Eric, Chris, and John to answer questions that you've posed on both industrial wind power and biomass.
So we have one right away that says, can you still get the federal subsidy for pellet stoves even if you use the grass pellets with the stove?
That's a good question. Some of the stoves have the capability to burn grass as well as wood pellets, and some of them need some modification to do so. Basically, you can burn grass in a wood pellet stove, but there'll be a lot of ash and you have to empty it. So to get this stove, I know Harman makes a few stoves that do well with grass. I'm not sure exactly if the subsidy matches up to the wood and grass pellet stoves. I would assume it does, though.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I know Harman makes 12 stoves maybe that are allowed to get a tax subsidy.
Okay, there was also a question, do you have any numbers on the job creation rates?
Rates? No, not on the rate, but if you look at a couple case studies, I mentioned the New England Wood Pellet Facility in Schuyler. That's a large regional pelletizing company. They do stuff all over New England and now in New York State. At their plant, they have 20 full-time employees working, and that's the most recent number I've heard. And there are also, a few multipliers from shipping and hiring companies to ship to and fro. So that's pretty much it. You just have to look at the case study at this point. But as for rates, it's not really apparent.
Yeah, it's still really an emerging industry, so there's not a whole lot of data yet for the U.S.
Okay, and we have a comment that said, which I think you guys probably think in terms of that as well, but jobs include the full supply chain.
Right.
So,
From growing to purchasing in stores that may perhaps sell this or the stoves. So.
Okay, one more related to the biomass. Do stoves burning grass pellets have cleanup technologies to take out sulfur and nitrous oxide? And what about chlorine?
I assume you're talking about the emissions. I know actually those chemicals actually in the grass can often impact the quality of the stove and its life, and grass pellets are better suited for that kind of erosion. But as for emissions, I don't think there is any kind of scrubber on any kind of chimney. There are a few options to. Some places you don't even need a chimney for this, but there are. It really depends on the stove you have. So there's not really one set stove, and it depends on your setup in your house, and it's all a little ambiguous. But we will have more information on the actual technology of the stoves in our policy brief, if you would like to see that later on with more details on different stoves and how they work.
Did we mention that in the beginning that there will, policy briefs are coming and we'll send you those links once they're completed. So let's move on to a question that we had. We had a couple more related to biomass, but I just want to be sure we get in the wind energy as well, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end. The question was about the code of conduct that the Attorney General has put out for wind energy companies and what challenges this might present for local municipalities as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've looked at this a little. I've seen the code. I haven't investigated, this is Kate McCarthy for the Wind Group, I haven't investigated its origins. However, my understanding of the code, and anyone out there can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that at this point it is voluntary for wind companies. It's a code of ethics. And then the follow-on question asked by this attendee about the code of ethics was, he said, wind companies, yes, they're industry, but in a lot of ways they're being treated as special industry. And that's absolutely true, even though we're trying to think about it in as simple a terms as possible, maybe like a light manufacturing that's in your town compared with a wind farm. It isn't the same thing, and we'll freely acknowledge that. And part of that has to do with New York State's and the efforts of many other states to for the renewable portfolio standard, that is getting a certain amount of energy, of the state's energy from so-called renewable sources by a certain year. And so going back, yes, it's industry, but it's special in the sense that it can help us move towards that goal. And that sets up a real tension between what the state's goals are and what local goals are, and it can leave certain types of industry like wind kind of hanging in the balance. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question, but those are sort of that's sort of an overarching theme that we've seen throughout that applies to this question about the code of ethics.
Okay, great. And right now we don't have any other related to wind, so why don't we move on to the next presentation, and if you come up with additional ones, we will take those at the end.
Now, one of the most important issues related to, that occurs at the local level, and the question that local policymakers ask the most often has to do with how to develop green jobs. This is a very complicated issue, and now we're going to talk a bit about how local policymakers think about green jobs and what kinds of things, what kinds of decisions they should make to develop green jobs. The presenters will be C.J. Randall, Anika Patterson, Kate Hess-Pace, and Anna Kahina. So, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Kate Hess-Pace, and this presentation is to help local officials learn about green jobs in the energy efficiency sector. And specifically, we're looking at weatherization programs and how to best take advantage of existing funding, as well as create new opportunities in the green economy. And over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about green jobs, both on the federal and state level. The stimulus bill provided $40 billion directly aimed at creating green jobs. And New York State just passed the Green Jobs, Green New York bill, which established a revolving loan fund to provide money to homeowners with funds to weatherize and retrofit. The aim is to save homeowners money, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and create green jobs. But despite all this talk about green jobs, their definition is somewhat ambiguous. Green jobs are a range of skilled and unskilled jobs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, pay well, and improve the environment. The Apollo Alliance emphasizes that green-collar jobs should both improve the environment, but also work to rebuild a strong middle class. And also, green jobs are not necessarily new. There are many jobs already in existence that fit into the category of green jobs. For people working on the local level, energy efficiency is the best place for job creation. According to the Pew Research Center, buildings are the greatest contributor to CO2 in the atmosphere, so there's also a large environmental impact to weatherization. So we recommend that policymakers begin by focusing on weatherization of homes and businesses in their community. And Anika is next, and she'll talk more in detail about weatherization.
So communities should begin by focusing on weatherization and retrofitting projects because these improvements make existing buildings more energy efficient. This ultimately saves residents money by reducing utility bills. According to the Department of Energy, a family whose homes is weatherized can expect to save approximately $358 on their first year of utility bills alone. The process of weatherization begins usually with an energy audit. This audit assesses how much energy the home uses and evaluates what measures can be taken to improve the efficiency. Some of these measures include insulating walls, replacing older windows with low-energy double-glazed windows, updating appliances to Energy Star level appliances, and also sealing air ducts. Job creation. We know that weatherizing and retrofitting homes, businesses, schools, and other government buildings creates local jobs. For every $1 million spent on weatherization, there's a generation of approximately 10 years of employment in the direct installation of the efficiency measures, and another 3 to 4 years in the employment for the activities around generating the relevant material. So 3 to 4 years of employment for jobs that are related to the manufacture of those windows, the manufacturing of the weather stripping material, and the appliances. There's still a lot more to do in New York State. There's approximately 500,000 homes have been weatherized in New York State since 1970s, but there's still over 1.5 million households in the state that need to be weatherized. Next, my colleague Anna Kahina is going to talk about the specific weatherization assistance programs that are available for homeowners, renters, and business owners.
Thank you, Anika. In our previous slide, we showed you that there's a strong demand for weatherization. Now we'd like to show you how to use the various energy efficiency financing programs to create jobs. Though there are many financing programs available to make residential and commercial buildings more energy efficient, and you guys probably already know some of the ones that are up on our slide, we'd like to highlight two programs in particular which have been useful in creating local green jobs. The first one of these programs is NYSERDA's Home Performance with Energy Star. This program is aimed at homeowners from various income levels and offers many financing options, such as an Energy Smart Loan, which is basically a low-interest loan that you can use to make energy efficiency improvements in your own home. Now, this program also requires the use of a Building Performance Institute certified contractor. We see this specific requirement as key because it encourages contractors to get this training as a way to increase their business. And as part of our research, we actually met with some contractors that had gone through the training process because they wanted to increase their business in weatherization. The other financing program, which plays an important role in local job creation, is the Weatherization Assistance Program. Now, this program is aimed at low-income renters and homeowners. And more importantly, New York State's Weatherization Assistance Program is the largest residential energy conservation program in the United States. In Tompkins County, Tompkins Community Action is the local provider for this program. They are also the largest green job employer in the county. Now, when we spoke to them in October, they were looking to hire even more people to weatherize homes because of additional funding they received through the stimulus. Now, at first, we didn't know what this additional funding meant. We thought it was just a couple of $1,000s. But when they read the numbers to us, we were quite shocked. In 2008, their program counted on approximately $360,000 worth of funding. Now, because of the stimulus, their budget has increased to $1.4 million for the next 18 months. This will create lots of new job opportunities at the local level. Now, in addition to promoting these important energy efficiency financing programs, local communities need to make sure that their workers have the right job training to work with the programs that are already on the market. NYSERDA is helping local communities increase education and training in energy efficiency by partnering with a consortium of community colleges through the SUNY Greens program. The various colleges in this program have made important changes to the curriculums to provide training and accreditation in energy efficiency. As part of our research, we met with the SUNY Greens program here at TC3, and they were telling us that they were encouraging their students to take classes in weatherization, residential heating, plumbing, and air conditioning systems. Lastly, we cannot emphasize enough how important it is to get some of the key certifications associated with the programs that we mentioned before. In addition to going through the training, contractors should also keep in mind that NYSERDA will help reimburse them for the cost of receiving this training. NYSERDA currently reimburses 75% of the approximately $10,000 costs associated with obtaining the BPI certification. Now, we realize that the stimulus has helped to create a lot of green jobs, but we don't want to keep this job creation just at the short-term level. What we really hope to do is that communities will take advantage of the new local entrepreneurs that want to get into the energy efficiency sector and provide them with the necessary support to make their businesses grow. My colleague Kate will discuss what kind of measures local communities can take to support their local entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Anna. After training, it's important that we give incentives for people to start local businesses, and communities can support entrepreneurs in a variety of ways. The local contractors that we spoke to said they would benefit from having a mentor to help them through the process of working with NYSERDA and the other funding agencies for all the weatherization and retrofit projects. Also, county economic development offices can contribute to energy efficiency efforts by developing a revolving loan fund for green businesses in need of startup or expansion capital. There are a lot of opportunities for local municipalities to promote green building. And New York State has set a great example in promoting local energy efficiency initiatives by passing the New York State Green Building Construction Act. And this bill requires that the state develop green building standards for all new construction of New York State government buildings. And the city of Syracuse has expanded on this by adopting the Green Building Ordinance, which requires all new municipal construction, including the public school system, to meet LEED Silver standards. So next up, CJ will make more specific recommendations that local policymakers can do.
All right, thanks a lot, Kate. Hi, I'm CJ Randall. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the slides here. Okay, thanks. Sorry, a little confusion over here. Yes, I'm CJ Randall. You see the 20 up there on your screen. There's an old joke that says if an economist comes along a $20 bill on the street, they don't pick it up because they know it can't exist. This kind of unclaimed opportunity seems impossible, so the $20 just sits there. We really see the weatherization of homes and buildings like that $20. There are few obstacles to realizing the value, but the $20 is there. We really feel like encouraging the large-scale participation is key, such as requiring no upfront investment from a homeowner. You can do this through benefit assessment districts, and these were first developed as a way to finance clean energy projects, among other things, by issuing bonds. So rather than the homeowner taking out a loan, the financing is repaid over a number of years through a special tax or assessment on the property bill of people participating in the program. This is allowed by New York State Property Tax Law, Section 102, and that's the authority that the town of Babylon used when they established their Long Island Green Homes program. This let them pass a town resolution, to include carbon in their definition of solid waste. That let them put a real number on how efficient their homes were. It's very, very innovative. Also, offering a simplified process for all the steps to completing a retrofit from start to finish is really essential. From program administrators working in conjunction with utility, energy auditors, contractors, can streamline this process so that it's one-stop shopping for someone who really wants to have this done for their home. The Center on Wisconsin Strategy, we fondly call COWS, has an excellent guide to starting up this city-level energy efficiency program, and we've included that link in the brief, so you can look that up later. There's a few things we'd really like to see included in any kind of recommendations for weatherization programs here in New York State. Firstly, mandating an energy efficiency rating for a building, kind of like energy miles per gallon, like you'd see on the window sticker of a new car, would help people have an idea of what's going on with their home if they're going to buy an older home or a new home. It's more commonly used in new homes now. It's like the HERS rating, HERS. That's common. We'd like to see this in retrofits too. Also, green jobs are not some boutique niche startups. We manufacture the materials used for weatherization right here in upstate New York. There's a company called Ultrafab in Farmington that's just south of Rochester on the 90, and they make weather stripping. Comfort Windows is a business in Syracuse that manufactures and installs these Energy Star windows all the way from Buffalo to Albany. And more recently, the Owens Corning plant in Bethlehem was just able to avoid furloughing over 100 employees thanks to the stimulus and this push for greater energy efficiency. So we'd like to ask the Advisory Council to NYSERDA, when they sit down and really think about how this Green Jobs, Green New York program will be implemented as a result of this act, we'd like to see New York State manufacturers really given a heads up here. So I think we really believe this will give a boost both to energy efficiency and manufacturing right here in New York State. And we've included some resources here. There's cows. And we'll be glad to answer your questions.
Are there questions?
At this point, we have one comment, and it's rural areas tend to have fewer BPI certified contractors. This is an impediment. Do you guys want to respond to that?
Yeah, Anna did a lot of the research on that, so we're going to let her take a stab at commenting on that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's definitely true and consistent to what we found in our research. So that's why we encourage people to take advantage of the NYSERDA funding to spread the word out. And we met a lot of young contractors that are getting into this because they know they can get funding for it. They also told us that part of the hardest part of going through the certification process was filling out the paperwork. So we also recommend that local communities talk to NYSERDA about that and see if someone can come down, host some training sessions, teach them how to go through all the paperwork required to get this certification. We think that that's also an impediment.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to continue on this theme of green jobs. As CJ mentioned, a lot of the materials for weatherization are manufactured in New York. Now we're going to hear a bit more about green technologies and manufacturing. Mark Lifberger is going to talk about why manufacturing green technologies matters in New York and how it can create more jobs.
Hi everybody, my name is Mark Lifberger and I'm a first-year fellow at the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs. If you look at the title of my presentation, it may seem a little peculiar. It's Attracting Solar Industry Manufacturers to Our Region. So ordinarily we're used to talking and hearing about using alternative energy. So whether it's installing solar panels on our roof, the roof of our home, the roof of our offices, or installing wind farms in our townships. But we're not so used to hearing about manufacturing the source of that alternative energy. And I think that's actually quite an important topic. And I'm going to specifically talk about solar panels because actually solar energy is the fastest growing, among all alternative energy sources, it's the fastest growing industry by about 40% a year, which actually means that the industry is doubling every 2 years. So as great as that is and as rapid as that is, it's actually projected to grow at an even faster rate in about 4 or 5 years. And at that time, it's projected that the cost of new solar power will be par with the cost of new sources of traditional electricity. And when that happens, the growth rate is going to take off even more. So I think it's actually critical that we begin to think about manufacturing solar panels in New York State. Okay, so but why is it not enough for us to use green energy? Why must we produce the technology behind green energy as well? Research has shown that actually 4 times as many jobs are created in the manufacturing of solar panels, which of course is how you get solar energy, as there are in the assembly and installation of solar panels. So if we just kind of sit back and we're satisfied with being green by installing solar panels, or for that matter installing wind farms, we're losing out on a lot of jobs, a lot of green jobs, and most of which are a lot of well-paying jobs. So that's kind of general, and now I want to talk about a place which I think can serve as kind of a hub for solar panel manufacturing right here in New York State. And I'm talking about Rochester, New York. Rochester in Monroe County, there are what I see as 2 elements which kind of can give it a unique standing and allow it to, like I said, serve as a hub for solar panel manufacturing. One is its educational facilities. Rochester is home to both RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and the University of Rochester, both of which, maybe some people don't know, both of which are actually have globally ranked engineering faculties. Having globally ranked engineering faculties in one I'll say moderately sized city means that for incoming companies, they have kind of almost a captive audience in the sense that they have talent, which if you assume that just a fraction of graduates are interested in staying in Rochester, so it means that companies don't have to kind of search far and wide and recruit people to come to Rochester. They're already there. So that makes things a lot easier for incoming companies. The second element is the existing industrial base, and I'm referring specifically to the optics industry. So we know that Kodak is headquartered in Rochester, or at least here in New York State, everybody knows, and Bosch and Lomb, but there are also a number of smaller firms which are headquartered in Rochester. And having these firms in the area means it's quite beneficial, because if you think about it, right, all these firms are involved in optics. And optics is really the study of light and the study of how light is kind of reflected and refracted and absorbed by different materials. This is actually the future of solar panel manufacturing, because the future is determining which material and what configuration of materials will yield the most energy in the least space, right? Using the least material. So, okay, that sounds great, but I think it's important that local officials, before they kind of run out to attract as many firms as possible, before they open their checkbooks, they need to think about some things in terms of determining whether it will be truly beneficial for their locality to give all kinds of tax incentives and tax breaks to potential companies. So there are five points that I determined should go on this checklist. So number one is, does the incoming company intend to do business locally? Okay, what I mean by that is, what kinds of equipment are they going to be purchasing locally, as opposed to a company that is, it's setting up shop locally, but all of their purchases are made from somewhere else. So that's going to have a much less of an impact on the community as a firm which really is going to integrate into the local community. Secondly, will the incoming company provide a boost in employment that can justify tax breaks? So here I'm just saying, how many people are they going to hire? Third is very, very connected to number two. Third is, what will be the quality of jobs that are produced as a result of the firm coming to town? Okay, so there's a big difference between a firm that's going to hire mostly engineers versus a firm that's going to hire a couple engineers and mostly machinists, or people who they're going to pay minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage, and who ultimately are going to, the municipality is going to have to, in some way or another, help out in terms of social services. Fourth, do the results of a formal economic impact analysis support your intuitions? Okay, so this is not something that should be done on the back of a napkin. It's something that should be done with professionals, and then the results need to be really looked at very, very closely to determine what kind of incentives are offered. The fifth point is probably the most important point. Is the senior management enthusiastic about living in the area? So in other words, are they really coming to the area because they're enthusiastic about living in Rochester or living wherever it is, or are they just coming because at that point in time you're offering them the most tax incentives? Before I conclude, I'll just summarize the key points from start to finish. One is, the solar energy industry is undergoing phenomenal growth and represents an opportunity for local officials to guide the local economy in the right direction. Bring renewable energy manufacturers, rather than just using renewable energy, would be a boost to local employment. I talked specifically about Monroe County as having a lot to offer: an educated workforce, an extensive educational offerings, entrepreneurial environment, and it's well placed. Basically, it's well placed in the center of the most populated quadrant of North America to serve as a solar panel hub in upstate New York. Lastly, to best serve their constituents, local officials must perform due diligence to ensure that they are courting the right company, one that creates well-paying jobs, and one that is coming to the area for the long haul. That's it. Now we're open to questions.
Thanks, Mark. I should tell the audience that we can take questions now, but we'll have time too at the end of the presentations to take questions. If you think of things that relate to any of the presentations as we move through them and you want to bring up that question, please feel free to write in. Our last presentation is going to be by Yelena Seltzer, who is speaking for herself, and Ruth Kroger, who may be listening in from Copenhagen, from the Conference on Climate Change. They've taken a different approach to looking at the green economy, one that's very popular among students, I should say, and also among farmers in upstate New York, and that is developing markets for local food producers. So Yelena is going to tell us about how local food producers can create new markets in upstate New York.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everybody joining us today. My name is Yelena Zeltzer, as Susan mentioned, and I'm going to be talking about the economic development potential of local food systems and what local officials can do to develop a vibrant local food economy in New York. First, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how creating a local food system will build wealth in our communities. Second, I'm going to touch on the barriers to local food. And third, I will present case studies of work already being done to address these barriers. And I'm going to talk about how local officials can expand on these efforts. So, why does local food matter? Well, wealth is created when local dollars go to support local businesses and products. However, the conventional food system, which is represented in this diagram, privileges large-scale global production and lowest prices. Local producers lose income when imported products substitute locally produced ones, and wealth escapes the region. In New York State, for example, we produce over 1 billion tons of apples, which is actually more than what we consume, but we still import apples from other states. What we want is to close the loop and prevent the leakage of wealth from our communities. We want to meet local demand with homegrown products. In a local food system, which is represented in this diagram, the chain of activities from production to processing, distribution, and to consumption happen within geographic proximity so that all the value added stays in that community. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't export or trade outside the region. What we're really talking about is supporting local agriculture instead of spending our money on imported products. This can contribute to a vibrant regional economy through job creation, increased tax revenues, and also building wealth in related sectors of the economy. So how exactly does local food create wealth? Well, very much like any other local business. Every dollar that's invested in agriculture creates wealth and jobs in related sectors of the local economy because local businesses and workers invest back in their communities. We had a very quaint diagram of a quartered cow here that didn't load this morning, so I'm just going to tell you the information that went along with it. Is that in Tompkins County, $80 worth of property taxes are collected per year, are generated per year for every dairy cow. If we combine all the local taxes collected from the farmer and the dairy farm workers, this brings it to $111 of local taxes collected per dairy cow. In addition to this, for every 12 cows, dairy cows, one job is created somewhere in a related sector of the local economy, for example, in veterinary services or feed production or inspection. So if we invest in small and medium-sized agricultural production, this will generate ripple effects within other sectors of the local economy. So what are the barriers to local food production? Well, in our research, we conducted interviews with town officials and with cooperative extension agents working in the field. And what it revealed to us is that a major problem is that local agricultural businesses lack the scale and resources necessary to compete with large-scale producers in the local market. We need to provide them with resources to help them, one, create alternative distribution networks, and two, gain access to appropriately scaled processing facilities. I'm going to now present 3 case studies that demonstrate what's already being done locally to address these barriers, and I will expand on how local officials can adopt some of these strategies on a municipal and county level. So one way to address these barriers is by linking local food systems activities to existing economic development resources. There are already state and local resources that support small business development. However, these resources are oriented towards manufacturing and industrial development. Agriculture is unfortunately not viewed as a wealth and job generating enterprise. What we have to do is change this kind of thinking. The Agricultural Development Corporation in Jefferson County provides a great example of looking at agriculture as any other industrial local industry that will provide economic development. What they do is they provide lots of support for food and ag businesses to locate in their county. For example, they offer Empire Zone benefits to ag manufacturing. Now, this is something that local officials can expand on. They can work with the county industrial development agencies and the state's enterprise zone program to make existing economic development resources available to ag businesses. Another thing that the Jefferson County Ag Development Corporation does is on their website, they provide information about existing loans and government grants. They also assist with grant writing and provide other information to help businesses with development. So all these resources are, in effect, and information is provided in a one-stop shop to the entrepreneurs. This is something that local officials elsewhere can also do. They can create resource and information hubs that give easy access to information for ag entrepreneurs. The Jefferson County's Development Corporation's website also hosts the county's agricultural economic development plan. And this is again something that should be done in all counties. We should develop agriculture and farmland protection plans. Many counties already do have these, but not all. This is something that's encouraged by the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, and they also make money available to update these plans. However, these are generally oriented towards farmland preservation and tax abatements, which is great, but we could do more than that. We can really gear these plans to emphasize agricultural development. A great resource that can bring a lot of expertise to these initiatives is Cornell Cooperative Extension. They do lots of work on agriculture and community development. Many counties already have extension agents operating in them, but not all counties. And investing in full-time ag development, extension agents will go a long way in helping formulate plans and accessing resources. So secondly, our second strategy is to promote consumer producer connections. This strategy is really intended to help raise consumer consciousness about availability and benefits of local products. One of the organizations we interviewed was Chenango Madison Bounty, and they use the power of the internet to raise the visibility of local products in their community. They are a nonprofit organization started by the Chenango Agriculture Development Council, and they really serve as an intermediary between producers and consumers, providing logistical support and serving as a distribution hub. They receive orders online from customers and they communicate them to producers who offer their products under individual brands. The orders are then assembled and delivered to each customer. Chenango Madison Bounty has been really successful. They are now distribute over 900 local products to more than 90 clients in the region. This raises visibility of local products and allows money to flow back into the local economy. Again, this is a great example of work already being done to address some of the barriers that I spoke about earlier. Local officials can implement similar strategies, but on a larger scale. Towns and counties can host local food events to help boost pride in regional products. They can also promote farmers markets and CSAs, which are community-supported agriculture programs. And this could mean two things. One is updating zoning codes to help with selecting appropriate sites for farmers markets. And it can also mean working with state agencies to make sure that electronic benefits transfers, which are the new form of food stamps, are available at all markets, making local food available to low-income consumers. Lastly, what local officials can also do is change their own food procurement policies to include local purchases. And this can do two things. It can boost the amount of local food being purchased, but it can also serve as a model to other large institutions in the area wishing to include local food in their purchasing. Our third strategy is that local governments can help build relationships among producers and increase their capacity for processing and distribution. One way to do this would be to organize networking events and conferences where local food producers and distributors can meet and network. This will give them the opportunity to figure out what the needs and the assets are in their communities and pursue partnership opportunities. Our research led us to an organization called Red Tomato. which has been able to take advantage of this type of networking. Red Tomato is a nonprofit that operates in Massachusetts, and what they do is provide logistical support to a network of farmers to help them coordinate existing resources and get their products to the market. Some the farmers they work with are operate at different scales, and some of them have more capacity, such as trucks or refrigeration facilities, and some of them do not. But the organization helps them coordinate these resources together and create an alternative distribution networks. They are now selling to over 25 grocery stores in the Northeast region. Another way to help develop local food production would be to cultivate relationships with local entrepreneurs interested in investing in processing infrastructure and connect them with local producers. Lastly, creating innovative financing for infrastructure investments will help with building a local food economy. One suggestion is creating revolving loan funds. There are a number of these funds in different counties around the state. Madison County has a revolving loan fund that is funded through the Rural Business Enterprise Grant of the USDA Rural Development Program. And another suggestion would be to create business incubators, such as industrial kitchens, where where startup processing businesses can get the support they need to become wealth-generating enterprises. So the three strategies that we think local governments can focus on are to help grow small and medium-sized ag businesses are one is to integrate food and agriculture into existing economic development programs. Two is to promote visibility of local products by facilitating direct consumer-producer connections. And three, foster relationships among producers and assist them in developing appropriately scaled processing and distribution infrastructure. I would like to wrap up by highlighting some key questions that local officials can ask themselves to start thinking about the local food system. For example, what are our existing incentives and support structures for local business development? Can we apply these to agricultural businesses? Also, what are the existing resources and how can we make them more readily available for farmers and ag entrepreneurs? Also, how could we take advantage of the work and resources offered by Cornell Cooperative Extension? Does the county already have an extension agent? If not, how can we foster these connections or help fund one? What sorts of events could we organize to promote local food products? This could involve making connections with regional and local grocery stores that are looking to source local products. And lastly, how can we reorganize our own purchasing policies to source more local food? So with these, thank you very much. And these are some of the resources that we came across during our research.
Okay, thank you, Yelena. We'll be taking questions in just a couple minutes, but I want to finish up by making a few comments on some things that this research has in common. These have been presentations of very, very different issues and approaches to the green economy, and they tell us that the green economy is not one thing. It has very different components to it, and they have to be dealt with very differently by local policymakers. I think that there are a number of things that we can say that come out of these presentations and the research that's been done that broadly captures some common features. The first thing is that we need to consider what works in our region and our state. What might be receiving incentives nationally may not be the best choice for New York State. So we not only have to think carefully about what the incentives are, but perhaps try to get incentives created that match the comparative advantage of New York State, as Chris and John demonstrated in their biofuels presentation. Secondly, green energy investments may be controversial. What looks like a good idea on the national scale, like wind energy, may have lots of problems associated with it when it actually hits the ground at the local level. And as Kate and Eric demonstrated, there have to be processes in place to ensure that all community interests are represented in the discussion of what to do and how to approach the actual implementation of a green energy economic development strategy. Third, we have taken as an assumption in this research that economic development is an important reason for taking on green energy investments. There are state and federal funds to aid communities, but the extent of what we can capture in economic development from these green investments depends on whether companies actually grow in the state and buy the resources they use, the supplies that they need in the state or in the region. We need to have a workforce that covers manufacturing as well as the application of green energy strategies, both energy efficiency and renewable energy. Finally, we could say that green energy investments have the potential to create jobs and create new businesses. But what we've realized in doing this research is that that won't happen automatically. Local policymakers have to consider what is most appropriate for their particular town or county. They have to obtain information, they have to go out and find the expertise they need, and then devise an inclusive decision-making process. So what happens is really in the best interest of the community. We hope that this webinar has given you some new ideas, and we look forward to your feedback. We'd really like to thank Cardi for sponsoring the webinar, and to Heidi for hosting it and putting it together. Now, we'd love to get questions and answer any comments that you have.
Okay, well, folks send in some additional questions. We'll address a couple of the ones that have come in, and we'll start with some that came in related to the solar panel production. And one of the questions was whether solar panel production presents pollution concerns.
Hi, this is Mark again. The answer actually is here in the United States. The answer is that here in the U.S., not so much. It can present pollution concerns. The main ingredient is polysilicon, and the good news is that polysilicon comes from sand, which is the most abundant substance on the face of the earth. So, but the bad news is that the process of producing solar panels does produce hydrochloric acid, which if it's dumped, it's pollution ultimately. But the good news is in the developed world, what we do is we actually recycle it, which requires a lot of energy, but we recycle it and then use it for the next batch of solar panels. So the answer is in China, yes, but in the United States, no, not really.
Okay. Second question related to solar is solar manufacturing transferable to other more economically distressed areas? So the example was with Rochester, and the question is, can that technology or manufacturing capability be transferred to other areas of the state?
I'd say I looked at Rochester for a reason, because like I mentioned, I thought there were a couple aspects to Rochester that kind of matched up well with solar panel manufacturing. So no, not just any old place will do. It's about trade-offs. To the extent that a place is kind of in the middle of nowhere and doesn't have, let's just say, top-ranked universities or an existing optical industry base, it also probably has much lower taxes, for example. It also could be located near, if we're using Rochester, it could be a place that's near Rochester, and maybe setting up the plant there. I mean, that's kind of the concept of industrial zones, setting them up in places where the taxes are lower, but they're still kind of near metropolitan areas. So I don't think there's let's say, a one-size-fits-all answer. It kind of depends on where you are and what your strengths are.
And this is Heidi, and I would welcome your guys' additional comments on this, but one thing that it strikes me is we've focused on communities in a lot of the way we're talking about this, but certainly we know that communities don't operate in isolation, or perhaps shouldn't necessarily be operating in isolation, and that there's broad opportunity for regional collaboration as we develop the policies to support these industries and these opportunities. One additional solar question was whether it makes sense to develop panels closer to their end user point instead of potentially shipping very big panels great distances from upstate New York to, say, Florida, and maybe it would make sense to produce them more closer to maybe southern states where they're using them more. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, you would think so, but I think the answer is actually not. It's not really so relevant in terms of north or south. The largest market for solar panels now is Germany in the world, and Germany and actually most of Western Europe is using solar energy much more than we are in the United States. So, to that extent, it's kind of it's a matter more of the incentives that are out there as opposed to strictly a matter of climate. Here in the U.S., New Jersey is much stronger in terms of supporting solar energy than Florida. So at first glance, maybe it would seem like it would make more sense to manufacture them in the South, but actually, we need to consider that kind of the world is the market. The market is the whole world, and so it's not really that simple.
Okay. Another question that just came in is there evidence to suggest that increasing the installation of EE or RE technology will encourage manufacturers of these technologies to establish local capacity?
Hi, I'm CJ. Again. As for encouraging them to establish it, I think that has more to do with the undercurrent of how we support manufacturing in general. The first thing that came to mind to me was the Toledo example of the largest solar plant in the country. A lot of people think that it's in Austin, but it was actually built in Toledo because they had a supply chain there already ready for it. And I think that does relate a bit to how we can encourage energy efficiency, the same measures, but on the energy efficiency model. So all these pieces together that go into weatherizing a home can be made here, and it can have the same kind of effect, I think. But none of this is going to be made without or done without any kind of a policy push, and I think that we've got that already with the Green Jobs Act. So we'd like to really see how it's implemented and go from there.
Thanks, CJ. We have one additional comment that came into us privately that we felt like was worth sharing. All of the comments, I should say, have been worth sharing, but that we wanted to make sure we did share. This one was related back to the wind energy and the Attorney General's Code of Conduct. And let me just move back up to when it came in. Okay, so this was in response to our presenters' discussion or in response to that question initially. And they said, thank you for the Code of Conduct answer. While the code is voluntary, I would urge any developer to think carefully before refusing to sign on. And I'm stuck. Okay, here we go. Indeed, I believe every major developer has signed on, but perhaps more important for this discussion, it impacts municipal officials too. Just as an FYI, Patty Sulkin of Albany Law has written quite a bit on it. Thanks again. And the presenters did also say that they have read a lot of Patty Sulkin's work and appreciated that comment. They found her stuff very helpful as well. So right now, I think that's all the questions and comments that we have had come in. There were a couple other comments that were sent to everybody in general, and the presenters acknowledged those on this end and agreed with them basically. So are there any other questions or comments out there, or any other questions or comments that you guys want to make here in the presentation room? Okay then, let's give it just a second and see if we get anything else in. Okay, it looks like we have one. So Northeast Livestock Processing Service Company's example in New York State, which provides a red tomatoes distributor's approach to livestock processing and distribution. So that's a good comment. Okay. I think that's it then. So I want to thank all of you out there again for joining us and ask that you join me in thanking Professor Christofferson and the members of her class. And they won't hear your applause, so I'm going to do it here. Because I know a lot of work has gone into this, and this was their first time working with a webinar, and I think overall it went very well, and appreciate all that's gone into this. I also want to thank Paul Treadwell with Cornell Cooperative Extension for his tech support. He helped us get set up today, and we appreciate his efforts there. You'll receive an email from me in the next couple of days with a link to an evaluation of today's webinar, and we ask that you please take the time to complete the evaluation, as your feedback will be used both to guide future presentations of this material as well as the overall webinar series. And these guys are finishing up their briefs, and I think welcome any feedback that you have that might contribute to that wrap-up. Along with the email, we'll send you a link to an online archive of this session in case you would like to view it again or share it with a colleague. And we'll also send out the list of resources that we mentioned